right, let's get into another deep dive.
Yeah, let's do it.
Today we're looking at the life and crimes of Kiboni Savage,
Oh, yeah.
a Philadelphia drug kingpin. Really fascinating story.
Absolutely. This guy's story is
Yeah. And it's a case, I think, that,
a harrowing journey.
yeah, really highlights just how destructive the drug trade can be.
Yes, the drug trade and just the brutality of gang violence, really.
The violence, it's all there.
Yeah, and so what's so interesting about this deep dive in particular is we're not just looking at a single crime.
Right.
We're looking at really his entire career through this Wikipedia article about his life.
It's amazing they have so much information.
So we're going to trace his path from athlete
Wow, really?
to the criminal underworld and all the shocking acts that led to his conviction.
Yeah, and you know what's fascinating about this?
Yeah.
His story isn't unique. This is kind of a classic. I mean, crime figures throughout history have followed this trajectory.
Yeah, that's a good point. Seduced by power, ultimately consumed by their ambition. I think it makes you wonder about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Like, what allows these figures to thrive?
The systemic factors, yeah.
Absolutely.
So let's start at the beginning with Kiboni Savage. He wasn't always this figure of violence.
Right.
He actually began boxing at a young age,
Wow.
training at the Front Street Gym in North Philadelphia.
Mm.
Even won his only professional bout.
So promising.
Hard to imagine this promising athlete would become this notorious drug lord.
Yeah, it's almost as if there was this fork in the road, and some event kind of set him on this darker path.
Yeah.
And I think one significant one was the death of his father from cancer when he was only 13.
That's young.
That kind of loss at such a young age can really create a void.
Right.
Leaving young people vulnerable, searching for belonging and control.
That makes sense, and it seems like that void was filled by the drug trade.
Yeah.
Savage started dealing in Hunting Park, a North Philadelphia neighborhood, and quickly rose up the ranks.
Yeah, and this coincided with the crack epidemic ravaging cities all over America.
In the 80s and 90s?
Exactly, in the 80s and 90s. It was lucrative but incredibly dangerous.
Right.
And, those willing to use violence, like Savage,
Yeah.
they were the ones who were used to power.
And violence was a part of his story really early on.
From the beginning.
Yeah, he was even suspected of committing his first murder
Really?
as a young man in a case involving a guy named Kenneth Lassiter.
Wow, tell me about that.
Yeah, so the details of the case are pretty disturbing.
Okay.
A minor altercation, a car bump in a parking lot,
Oh, wow.
escalated into a fatal shooting.
Oh, gosh.
Savage was acquitted, though,
Really?
due to the death of the lead witness,
Oh, my goodness.
which really speaks volumes about the code of silence and the fear of retaliation.
It's a chilling example of how the pursuit of justice can be obstructed by just intimidation and violence.
Yeah, it's a pattern that we see
Throughout.
throughout his story. He built a huge drug network, distributing hundreds of kilos of cocaine throughout Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't afraid to use brutal tactics to protect his empire.
It's striking because he wasn't just targeting rival gangs or dealers.
Right.
It went beyond individual acts of violence. It was really anyone who crossed him or even those he just suspected of being disloyal.
Wow.
And that reign of terror had a huge impact on the community, instilling fear and eroding any sort of trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a really brutal example of this is the murder of Carlton Brown,
Oh, right, Carlton Brown.
a rival drug dealer
In broad daylight.
in broad daylight. It sent a really clear message, right? Defy him and you face deadly consequences.
Yeah.
This wasn't just about eliminating competition. This was about maintaining absolute control.
And even when he ended up in federal detention center in Philadelphia,
Yeah.
Savage's attempts to control and intimidate continued.
Really?
He was known to threaten witnesses and their families,
Oh, wow.
even going so far as to threaten the children of those who might testify against him.
Scott.
Really, a need for control extended beyond the bars of his cell.
Yeah, I mean, this brings up an interesting question, right, about the nature of power.
Yeah.
Because for someone like Savage, it wasn't enough to just have influence on the streets.
Right.
He needed to maintain that grip on power even behind bars.
Wow.
It's a deep-seated need for dominance, this belief that he's above the law and can dictate his own sort of twisted justice.
It's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
But even with this level of control, there was one tragedy that Savage couldn't prevent.
Okay.
A tragedy that struck close to home
Oh.
and would trigger his most horrific crime.
Okay.
And that was the death of his 9-year-old daughter,
Oh, my gosh.
Ciara Cece Savage.
So sad.
She was killed in a gang shooting in York, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
Devastating blow for Savage, who, despite his ruthlessness, was really deeply affected by her death.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to fathom the pain of losing a child, especially like that.
Yeah, especially in the world that he created.
In that world,
Yeah, you'd think this might be a turning point for him.
you'd hope so.
Yeah.
Sadly, it wasn't.
Yeah.
This tragedy didn't lead to any remorse or a change of heart.
Right.
Instead, it fueled a rage that would have horrific consequences and culminate in one of the most shocking acts of revenge in Philadelphia's history.
Yeah, let's talk about that act of revenge.
Right.
Because it's a pivotal point in this deep dive.
Yeah.
And reveals a lot about Kobani Savage's mindset and the lengths he was willing to go to.
Okay.
It all centers around a man named Eugene Twin Coleman.
Oh, right.
So Eugene Twin Coleman, he was one of Savage's associates,
Right.
decided to turn informant and testify against him.
Wow. You can imagine how that went over.
I can only imagine.
Betrayal in that world,
Yeah.
a cardinal sin,
Especially for a guy like Savage.
especially for a guy like Savage.
Built his empire on loyalty and fear.
Couldn't ignore it.
Right.
Direct challenge.
A public humiliation.
Yeah.
So consumed by this rage and thirst for revenge,
Right.
Savage orders the firebombing of Coleman's mother's house.
This wasn't just about silencing a witness. This was about sending a message.
Right.
Brutal message.
That there would be retribution.
Any act of betrayal,
Yeah.
swift and merciless.
And he didn't just target Coleman.
Right.
He targeted his family.
His whole family.
The details of that firebombing are just incredibly disturbing.
I can imagine.
Really a reminder of the just devastation that this kind of violence can inflict.
On families and communities.
Yeah, the fire just ripped through the house.
Horrible.
Took the lives of 6 people,
Oh my gosh.
4 children,
Oh my
and
goodness.
Coleman's mother.
So awful.
And what's even more disturbing
Yeah.
is Savage's reaction when he learns about the deaths.
What did he say?
He was recorded saying
Yeah.
they should stop off and get him some barbecue sauce. Pour it on them burnt bitches.
That is just chilling. Bone chilling.
It really is.
No remorse.
Yeah.
Depths of his depravity.
To orchestrate their deaths and then
Mock their suffering.
mock their suffering.
Dehumanize them further.
Yeah, and to bring this horrific plan to life.
Right.
It required a network of accomplices,
I imagine.
including Savage's own sister,
Really?
Hoida Kida Da Savage.
Wow. How does that even happen?
It's really a chilling example of how family loyalty can be twisted.
By ambition.
Yeah, by criminal ambition.
Wow.
She played a key role in the firebombing.
What did she do?
She recruited the hitman,
Oh, wow.
Lamont Lewis,
Okay.
and even showed him where the house was located.
Wow.
And then there's Robert B.J. Merritt Jr.,
Okay.
Lewis's cousin,
Yeah.
helped carry out the attack.
So they used gasoline,
Yeah.
turned the house into an inferno.
Just calculated and deliberate.
It's a dark reminder of the darkness in the human heart.
Yeah.
But thankfully,
Yeah.
Lamont Lewis ultimately cooperated with the authorities.
Yeah, he flipped,
He fled.
leading to the arrests and
Or-
prosecution
Would have Savage.
of those involved.
It's amazing how pivotal that can be.
Yeah, without that cooperation,
He might have gotten away with it.
it's possible
It really shows the importance of witness testimony.
in dismantling these criminal enterprises.
Yeah, and ensuring that justice is served.
So the trial itself was a major event.
Bet.
Jury selection began in September 2012,
Okay.
and Savage was convicted in May of 2013.
Took a while.
Yeah, but the evidence against him was overwhelming.
So what were the charges?
He was convicted on 17 charges,
17. Wow.
including 12 counts of murder in aid of racketeering.
Wow. So this wasn't just about the firebombing.
No.
This was years of criminal activity.
Drug trafficking,
Yeah.
witness intimidation, this reign of terror that spanned years.
And he received the death penalty.
Yeah, for those crimes, he received a sentence that really reflected just the gravity of his actions.
Yeah.
The death penalty.
Wow.
He was sentenced to death not once, but 13 times.
Oh, my goodness.
Once for witness intimidation
Right.
and once for each of the 12 murders.
That's the first federal death sentence handed down in Philadelphia.
In modern history.
Modern history, wow.
Really underscored the court's understanding of the impact of his crimes.
Absolutely.
Not just on the individuals, but on the community as a whole.
Right. But even with this seemingly definitive conclusion,
Right.
the story takes an unexpected turn.
Yeah.
An unexpected turn.
In December 2024, President Biden commuted Savage's death sentence.
Really?
He will now serve a life sentence without the possibility of parole.
That ignited a firestorm of debate, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely.
Because some people felt that even a man like Savage deserves a chance at rehabilitation,
Right.
while others felt that the commutation diminishes the suffering of the victims.
Undermines the justice system.
Yeah.
So it's a complex issue.
Yeah, it's not about taking sides.
Not about taking sides.
It's about understanding this case and exploring the questions that it raises.
Right. Yeah, so we're left with a lot to think about here.
Absolutely.
The commutation brings up these huge questions about justice and punishment, and whether someone who's done such awful things can ever really be redeemed.
Yeah, can people change?
Right. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's a question that philosophers and legal scholars have debated for centuries, right?
Yeah.
Is the purpose of punishment, retribution, deterrence, or rehabilitation?
Right.
Can someone who's done such terrible things ever atone for their sins?
Yeah.
Savage's case forces us to really think about these uncomfortable truths.
And it's not just about Savage himself.
Right.
We have to consider the victims, the family,
The community?
as a whole. Even with a life sentence, the
Yeah.
story doesn't really end.
No.
Those ripples of pain and trauma just continue to spread.
It's a reminder that the justice system, as important as it is,
Yeah.
it can't address those long-lasting effects of violent crime.
The healing process is ongoing.
For everyone involved.
Right. Let's talk about some of the other people involved in this case.
Right.
Like Savage's sister,
Right.
Kadada, who helped orchestrate the firebombing.
Yeah, she got a life sentence plus 10 years.
Plus 10 years.
Yeah.
And Robert Merritt Jr.,
Right. The hitman.
a hitman,
Yeah.
he also received a life sentence.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Really showing that the court understands that everyone involved in these crimes,
That's be held accountable.
even if they didn't directly commit the murders.
Absolutely.
And then there's Lamont Lewis.
Oh, right. The hitman who turned informant.
Yeah.
I mean, his testimony was so important.
Absolutely.
He got 40 years
the minimum.
under his plea agreement.
Right.
But his case is interesting
Yeah.
because it really makes you think about redemption, right?
Yeah.
He participated in this horrible crime,
Right.
but his cooperation was so key to getting justice.
So can someone who's committed a terrible act ever redeem themselves?
It's a tough question.
There's no easy answer to that one.
Not at all.
So Kavoni Savage's story.
Yeah. It's more than just crime and punishment.
It really is.
It's about the human condition, you know?
Yeah.
Choices we make, the consequences.
The enduring power of hope, even in the face of all this darkness.
Yeah. It's a story that stays with you.
It does.
Makes you think about justice, morality, redemption.
So I hope everyone listening will consider this.
Yeah.
How does Kavoni Savage's story shape your views on crime and punishment,
On forgiveness.
on forgiveness and redemption?
Yeah.
What are the lessons that we can learn from this as people and as a society to prevent this from happening again?
To create a better future.
Yeah, those are questions worth thinking about.
Absolutely.
And I encourage you to keep looking into this case and what it all means.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. All right, so we've got this this set of sources here on Kenneth Supreme McGriff. And today we're going to really kind of dive deep into his story, right? A life that kind of intersects with the drug trade, the music industry, and really some huge names in hip-hop. And we're relying heavily on his Wikipedia entry. It's actually surprisingly detailed in painting a picture of his rise and fall, you know?
Yeah, and what's really interesting here is that McGriff's story, it's not just about one man, you know? I mean, it really gives us a window into this, like, very specific time and place in American history.
For sure, for sure.
And, you know, his life kind of unfolded against this backdrop of the crack cocaine epidemic, the war on drugs, and, you know, this rapidly evolving hip-hop scene.
Okay, so let's sort of break this down a bit, right? I mean, Supreme wasn't just born a kingpin, so to speak. Like, what were the conditions that allowed someone like him to sort of build this drug empire in Queens?
Well, he was born in 1960 in New York City. And by the early 80s, like, he formed the Supreme team, right, in the Baisley Park houses in Queens.
Right.
And this was during the peak of the crack epidemic.
Right, right.
A time of, you know, just immense social and economic upheaval, particularly in marginalized communities.
Yeah.
So there was this void, this lack of opportunity, and a sense of desperation.
Yeah.
And that created fertile ground for these, you know, criminal enterprises to take root.
Absolutely. So how did he manage to, like, gain so much power so quickly? I mean,
Yeah.
was it just brute force? Or was there more to it, something else?
Well, McGriff was a shrewd guy. He understood the streets, you
Yeah.
know, and he built this hierarchical structure within the Supreme team with hundreds of members, right, working under him.
Wow.
And this level of organization, you know, allowed him to control the crack cocaine trade in their neighborhood, right, and amass significant wealth and influence.
Man, the name the Supreme Team, it sounds like something straight out of a movie. right? Was it as dramatic and intense as it sounds?
Oh, it was harsh, their reality, I mean. Just think about these young men, many teenagers even, drawn into this world of violence and crime. They were driven by poverty, the lack of opportunity, and the allure of fast money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And McGriff was able to capitalize on this, this desperation, creating a system that was both, highly profitable and incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, a recipe for disaster. And we know that in 1987, after a pretty big investigation, he's arrested and hit with a serious charge, continuing criminal enterprise.
Right.
And some people listening might be wondering, like, what exactly does that mean, right? What does that entail?
Yeah, that charge, that goes way beyond a simple drug possession or distribution case, right? It
Yeah.
indicates that McGriff wasn't just some, street-level dealer. He was the leader, right, of a large-scale ongoing criminal organization.
Whoa. So what kind of evidence led to that charge? I mean, was it purely about the drug trade, or were there other, criminal activities involved?
Well, the indictment against McGriff and the Supreme Team, it outlines this complex web of activity, including drug trafficking, money laundering, violence.
Wow.
He wasn't just selling drugs. I mean, he was running this sophisticated operation, with multiple layers and a clear chain of command. There were financial transactions, patterns of drug distribution, witness testimonies. All this pointed to a large-scale ongoing criminal enterprise.
And that resulted in a 12-year sentence, right?
That's right, yeah. But, even behind bars, his story isn't over.
Oh.
Yeah, he was released early on parole, only to, end up back in prison for violations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a cycle we see all the time, these challenges of reintegration for ex-offenders, this pull of the familiar and the difficulty of breaking free from the past.
It's tough, man.
Oh,
But McGriff, he did get out again.
Right.
Right, like in 1997.
That's right.
And this is where his story takes this really interesting turn, right? Like, he gets involved with Murder, Inc., that famous hip-hop label.
yeah, that's right.
But just as his life seemed to be going in a new direction, like his past, it's about to catch up with him
Mm-hmm.
in a big way. I think a lot of people listening are probably curious, right?
Yeah.
About, McGriff's connection to Murder, Inc. I mean, this is where his story kind of takes this turn into the music industry, which seems like, I don't know, a world away from, like, the streets of Queens.
Right, right.
You know what I mean?
Well, McGriff, I mean, despite his past, right, he really had this ambition, I guess, to be a filmmaker. And he actually even, sought out Irv Gotti,
Oh, wow.
the co-founder of Murder, Inc., one of the, most successful hip-hop labels at the time.
Yeah, for sure. So, like, the former drug lord wants to make movies. Was this a genuine interest, or was there something, more to it? Like, was he using this to try to, like, I don't know, legitimize his wealth or, like, gain social acceptance?
Well, it's hard to say, for sure what his real intentions were.
Mhm.
Some people think he saw filmmaking as a way to launder money, or to kind of, reinvent himself as a legitimate businessman.
Right.
Others think he really had a passion for storytelling and saw this as an opportunity to break into, a new industry. We know from the sources that, he wanted to adapt this crime novel into a film.
Oh, really? That's interesting. What was the novel about?
Oh,
Like,
right.
what drew him to that specific story,
Unfortunately, the sources we have don't give any specifics about the novel or, his creative vision for the film.
Okay.
But it's definitely an interesting clue, right? It could shed some light on, his motivations and aspirations, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. It's a shame we don't know more about that. But I mean, even without knowing the details, right, this connection to Murder, Inc., it must have raised some red flags, especially with the FBI, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The FBI had been watching McGriff for years. And, his move into the music industry, this world often associated with, tons of cash and questionable business practices. I mean, it definitely got their attention.
For sure. And that scrutiny led to a raid on Murder, Inc.'s offices, right?
Yeah.
What were they looking for?
They were investigating these allegations of drug trafficking, money laundering, specifically any financial ties between McGriff and the label. They thought maybe he was using Murder, Inc. as a front, for his activities.
So this wasn't just about music anymore.
Right.
Like, this is about the potential for McGriff to be kind of like pulling the strings behind the scenes. What impact did this have on Murder, Inc. and, the artists signed to the label?
Well, the raid, it really sent shockwaves, through the hip-hop community.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, I mean, it cast this, shadow of suspicion over Murder, Inc., raising questions about their legitimacy and where their funding was coming from.
Right.
And it put a lot of pressure on the artists associated with the label, like Ja Rule, Ashanti. I mean, their careers were really just taking off.
Oh, yeah. That's got to be so hard to navigate, right?
Yeah.
Like, imagine being, this young, talented musician, and all of a sudden, your label is being raided by the FBI,
Yeah.
and, like, your mentor's under investigation, and your name's being mentioned in connection with, this convicted drug lord.
Exactly. It's like a prime example of guilt by association.
Yeah.
Even if they weren't, directly involved in anything, their connection to McGriff and Murder, Inc., it really tarnished their reputation, and it even threatened to, derail their careers.
Totally. But wasn't there also, like, this element of exploitation here? Like, was McGriff using these artists to kind of, like, further his own agenda, or were they actually drawn to, like, his mentorship and, the opportunities he offered?
It's a complex question. There's no easy answers. On one hand, McGriff's interest in the industry, it could have been, totally opportunistic. Like maybe he saw them as a way to, launder money or, get a foothold in this lucrative industry.
Right, yeah.
On the other hand, maybe he really did believe in their talent and wanted to help them succeed.
Right. It's so hard to separate, those motivations,
Right.
especially given his history. And, this association, it had some very real consequences.
Right.
Like not just the legal scrutiny, but also this potential for violence. Like, we can't forget McGriff's name came up in the investigation into Jam Master Jay's murder.
Right. In that case, it's still unsolved. It hangs over this whole period.
Yeah.
And federal authorities, they investigated McGriff in connection with that 2000 shooting of 50 Cent.
Wow.
Yeah, there were allegations, right, that he orchestrated the attack because of, perceived disrespect in the rapper's lyrics.
It's crazy how, like, these events, especially violence, how they kind of mirrored, like, some of the themes and narratives that were popular in hip-hop, at the time. What do you make of that connection?
It shows the, complex and often, contradictory relationship between hip-hop and the streets. On one hand, hip-hop came about as a voice for the marginalized, right?
Right.
A way to express the realities of poverty, violence, oppression.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it also glamorized certain aspects of, street culture.
Yeah.
And it blurred the lines between reality and artistic expression.
And in McGriff's case, those lines, they became, I don't know, tragically intertwined. Like, this wasn't just about the music, the business anymore, right? This was about life and death.
Unfortunately, yeah, you're right. And in 2001, the violence, it escalated. And McGriff was implicated in these murders of Eric E. Moneybags Smith and Big Nose Trey Singleton.
And these weren't, like, just abstract crimes. I mean, these were real people with families, friends, whose lives were, changed forever.
Exactly, yeah. And the sources we have, they say that both murders, they were allegedly acts of revenge for the death of McGriff's friend, Colbert Black Just Johnson.
So this wasn't just about, like, turf wars,
Yeah.
drug deals gone wrong, right? Like, this was about, like, personal vendettas and this cycle of violence that just seemed to have, no end.
And these murders, they would lead to McGriff's, downfall, bringing this whole complex and controversial journey to an end. But, before we get into, the last chapter of his story, let's think for a second, right, about the impact he had on the music industry, the lives of the people who, crossed his path.
Yeah. Okay. In the next part, we'll look at, the aftermath of his criminal career, right? Like his life behind bars and these sort of big questions that his story brings up about justice, redemption, and, that whole cyclical nature of violence. Okay. So we've gone through, Kenneth Supreme, McGriff's rise and fall, right? His moves into the music world and all that violence that just seemed to follow him. So now I guess we're at the final chapter. Like, what were the consequences of his actions and what's his life like these days?
Well, like we were saying, those 2001 murders, those are a big turning point. I mean, the prosecution, their argument was that they weren't just random acts of violence,
Right.
They were like calculated executions, murders for hire, like ordered by McGriff himself.
And the evidence, it was strong enough to actually, like, convict him. This wasn't just, like, rumors or speculation.
Oh, yeah. After this long trial in 2007, McGriff, he was found guilty. Murder, conspiracy, drug trafficking, all related to those deaths. And he was sentenced to life.
Wow. So after everything, right, like building this whole empire, trying to reinvent himself, it all, like, falls apart. I mean, that's going to be a far cry from the streets he used to run, right?
Yeah, I mean, just picture the difference, right? Instead of the hustle and bustle of Queens, he's now at USP McCreary, that's in Kentucky, a high-security prison. And it's not just about, being locked up. It's about losing everything he built, right? The power, the influence, the freedom, all of it.
It's like this stark reminder, that building a life on, like, illegal stuff just doesn't last.
Exactly. Like, McGriff's story, It's a classic example of, I don't know, hubris. That belief that you're above the law, that you're untouchable. But the law, even if it takes time, it usually wins. And there were other things going on too, right? Like law enforcement, their tactics were getting better, more sophisticated in how they went after organized crime.
Right.
And even the nature of these criminal enterprises, built on violence and not trusting anyone, I mean, that makes them really unstable from the start.
It's almost like, I don't know, like Shakespearean or something.
Yeah.
This rise and fall, this guy who seemed invincible and then, boom, brought down by the things he did himself.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a good reminder that the stuff we do, our actions, they have this ripple effect. They don't just impact us, but the people around us too.
You're talking about like the families of the victims, the communities affected by his, drug dealing, the artists who got caught up in the investigation, all that.
All of that, yeah. And even those people who might, admire parts of his story, like the ambition, the street smarts, whatever. They got to look at the whole picture, right? The violence, the destruction, the human cost.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about, that's for sure. And it leads to some like really tough questions. Like, is there any chance of redemption for someone like McGriff? Can a guy who, ordered murders, can he really feel sorry and like try to make up for what he did?
I think that's where everyone's own perspective comes in, right? Some
Yeah.
people might say, look, a life sentence, that's fair. What he did was so bad, there's no coming back from that. Others might think, well, even in prison, people can change. Maybe he can really face his past and, truly regret what happened.
It's complicated. No easy answers.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something we got to talk about, right?
Yeah.
Especially when we think about what our justice system is for, that balance between punishment and, rehabilitation.
Definitely. I mean, McGriff's story makes us think hard about these things. We got to go beyond simple ideas of good and evil. We got to see how complicated people really are.
Yeah, I agree. So, like, now that we're at the end of this whole deep dive, what's the one thing, like the most important takeaway that you'd want our listeners to, walk away with?
I think it's this McGriff story. It's a warning, right? It shows us that choices have consequences and that living outside the law, well, it often ends badly. But it's also a story that makes us look deeper, beyond just the headlines, like what were the social and economic things that shaped him, And it makes us think about these big ideas, justice, redemption, and whether people can really change.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot today, right? From the streets of Queens to, the top of the music world, and finally to life in prison. We hope you'll keep digging into this story, check out the sources we've got, and, decide for yourself what you think about Kenneth Supreme McGriff and what his story means. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. All right, so get this. We're going deep on Larry Hoover today. You sent over these excerpts from his Wikipedia page, and wow, just wow.
Really is something.
This guy, I mean, we're talking empire building, rebranding himself, even catching Kanye West's attention.
Yeah,
How can one person be all these things? That's what we're going to figure out.
It's wild how Hoover's life is like intertwined with Chicago's whole story. Cities shaped by all these social and economic forces, and it all kind of spills onto the streets.
Okay, so let's go back to the start. Mississippi born, but lands in Chicago at 4 years old. Huge change, right? Especially back then. Think that move shaped him.
Hard to say for sure, but Chicago, mid-20th century, man, it was a melting pot. Racial tensions, economic gaps, gangs changing constantly. No wonder a kid like Hoover drops out at 13, gets pulled in.
And he doesn't just join any gang, right? It's the Supreme gangsters. What made them different in Chicago's gang world?
Think of it like this. South Side. All territories, right? Each one controlled by different groups. Supreme gangsters under Hoover, they weren't content just holding on. They wanted more power.
Ambitious. And then, 1969, the merger. Black disciples, they formed the Black Gangster Disciple Nation. Big name.
Oh yeah, commands attention. New era for them. But the real shift, 1974, David Barksdale dies. He was leading the Black Disciples. Hoover steps right in, takes over everything.
Gang member to basically running the South Side show. Did his style, did it change things?
Hoover, man, he had charisma, strategic, could unite different factions, wasn't just muscle, he had a vision.
But even with his leadership, there was still other gangs, rivals.
Big time. Black Gangster Disciple Nation, everyone noticed. Fierce rivals, People Nation, bunch of gangs together, Black P. Stone Nation, Vice Lords. clashes. It was a cycle, violence for decades.
Can't even imagine the tension, the danger back then. And here's the crazy part, 73, he's locked up. But his power, it doesn't go away, grows almost. 78, forms the folk nation, even more gangs under him.
Yeah.
How's that even possible from prison?
Loyalty, man. Hoover built loyalty, control, even from inside. Lieutenants, messengers, a whole network ran things from his cell.
So being locked up didn't stop him at all.
Nope. Gangster disciples, folk nation, they spread everywhere, all over the U.S. Hoover's reach way beyond those prison walls.
But then later on, things change. Hoover starts talking about, no more violence, rebranding GD to mean growth and development. What was that? Change of heart or a calculated move?
That's the question, isn't it? Some say PR stunt, look better, maybe get out sooner. Others, they point to his book, 96, The Blueprint of a New Concept, From Gangster Disciple to Growth and Development. A real desire to change, they say.
Hold on. He wrote a book. Okay, now I'm really interested.
It's a glimpse inside his head, that time period. Fascinating read, especially with everything else going on before and after.
So what's in it? Concrete plan for this growth and development? Or just talk?
It's his journey, regrets, a vision for the gangster disciples, but different. Shift from crime to community, from violence to social economic power.
Big change from drugs and turf wars. But did he actually walk the walk?
That's where the doubt comes in. Some see it as manipulation, control, but looking like he's moved on from the violence.
Wants it both ways. Renouncing violence, but keeping the power he got from it.
Exactly. And then, July 2022 statement, Hoover says, I want nothing to do with the gangster disciples anymore. Real or just a move. Hard to say.
It's almost like man and myth all mixed up. Yeah, makes you think. Changing someone with a past like that. But we can't forget, even with the talk of changing, there were real consequences to his actions.
For sure. Victims, families, whole communities scarred by the gangster disciples, the violence. You can't just erase that, rebrand, or say you're done.
Right. And then there's the legal stuff. 73, convicted, murder of William Young, drug dealer, accused of stealing from the gang.
Yeah, Young.
Big sentence, life plus 200 years. Serious stuff. Shows how seriously they took it. Gang violence back then.
No kidding.
Okay, now fast forward. 97. Already doing life, but gets convicted again. Running a criminal enterprise. From prison. How?
Shows you control, even locked up. Investigation took 17 years, wiretaps, informants, the whole 9 yards.
17 years. That's longer than some folks' careers. What'd they even find?
Huge operation. Gangster disciples with Hoover calling the shots from inside. 30,000 members making like $100 million a year. Drugs, all sorts of illegal stuff.
Like a Fortune 500, but from a cell. Crazy.
Makes you wonder, right? Prison, rehabilitation, all that. If someone can pull strings like that, locked up, what does it say about the system?
Yeah, no easy answers there. So where is he now?
ADX Florence, Colorado. Supermax. The really serious one.
Oh yeah, ADX Florence.
Yeah.
Heard it called like a clean version of hell.
Isolation, 23 hours a day, alone. Little contact, no outside world really. Far cry from all that power he had.
Hard to picture powerful gang leader to that. But even now, there are people. They want him out.
His wife, Wendy Jenkins Hoover, she's been fighting for him. Clemency started the Larry Hoover Project, getting his story out there, pushing for a review of his sentence.
Larry Hoover Project. What's their main argument? Are they saying he's innocent or just that he's done enough time?
It's more about Hoover's changed, they say. Admits his mistakes, wants to do good, done his time, deserves the second chance, they argue.
Redemption. But how do you get past what he did? Accountability versus second chances. Tough question.
Tough question for everyone, not just Hoover. Justice system, forgiveness, what does rehabilitation really mean? We gotta talk about it.
Interesting how this project changes the story. Not just the gangster, the crime boss, but about change, maybe a different future.
So even people who do bad things, they're human, they can grow, change. Whether you buy Hoover's redemption, that's up to you. But it makes you think justice, forgiveness, second chances, all that.
And then there's the Kanye thing.
Yeah.
Famous rapper wants a convicted gang leader freed. Doesn't happen every day.
Strange pairing, sure. But shows you how Hoover's story, people are drawn to it. Kanye, he admires him in a way, sees him as a a survivor, a product of a system that chews people up, especially in certain communities.
So it's not just Hoover's, it's bigger than that. The system, what leads to crime, to prison.
Yeah, exactly. Fits with Kanye's other stuff, social justice, especially for Black communities.
And it's not just talk, right? Kanye actually tried to get Trump to pardon him back in 2018.
Then there was that Free Larry Hoover concert, December 2021, with Drake. Huge. Got people talking, that's for sure.
Big statement. But was it just about Hoover, or was it more like prison reform, mass incarceration, all that?
It was about the human cost of prison, especially those long, long sentences for things that happened years ago. Redemption, second chances, being more human with justice.
It's amazing Hoover's story. Now it's tied up with these bigger issues. Like his life is how we look at these big questions. Legal stuff, talk of changing, famous people backing him, and so many unanswered questions.
Yeah, it's that tension, the image, what he wants us to see, and then what he actually did. Maybe we'll never really know the whole story.
His book, The Blueprint of a New Concept, you mentioned it. Any real insights in there, or just more PR?
Interesting read for sure, even if you don't believe all of it. Thing is, how he talks about his past, the gangster disciples, the pain, the bad stuff, he admits it, but he says he was trying to build something, community of belonging for young Black men who felt left out,
So he's saying it was like social work, but gone wrong.
Yeah.
That's a tough sell with all the violence, the crime.
It is, and he says the growth and development, that was real. Changing the gang away from crime towards helping the community, investing in education, jobs, real businesses.
But he was still in charge, even from prison.
Yeah.
Running the whole thing. How does that fit?
Right. Hard to know how much was real, how much was just playing the game. And even if we believe him a little, there's still so much damage done.
Messy, for sure. And then his wife, the Larry Hoover Project, they want him pardoned, saying he's changed. Do they deal with all these contradictions?
They focus on him growing, changing, being a force for peace inside prison. They say he's done his time, he's different now, deserves a chance to give back.
But aren't we kind of forgetting what he did? Accountability, redemption.
Yeah.
Where's the balance?
That's bigger than just Hoover. It's about all of us, our justice system. What does forgiveness mean? Second chances. We got to figure that out.
And then Kanye West, wow, world famous, and he's fighting for Larry Hoover. Changes everything, doesn't it?
That's a star like that. It's huge. Brought attention like nothing else could.
Kanye sees him as a symbol, right? The problems with the system for Black communities. It's not just about Hoover. It's about all of that.
Exactly. Challenging how we see people like Hoover. Not just criminals, but understanding why, the social stuff, the economics, all of it.
There's always more to the story than we see at first. Larry Hoover built a criminal empire, then wanted to be a community leader, and now Kanye West is on his side. A lot to unpack here.
It is, and that's why we do these deep dives, making us think, questioning what we think we know, really engaging with these big questions.
So wrapping up our deep dive into Larry Hoover, what's the one thing you hope our listener walks away with?
I hope it makes them curious, to learn more, understand the things that shape our world, the people in it. Larry Hoover's story, it reminds us that even the simply stories, they're usually complicated, full of contradictions.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
We have, but the conversation, thinking about all this, I hope that continues.
Absolutely. Thanks for being with us on this journey, and we'll see you next time on the deep dive. All right, so welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking into Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols.
Oh, yeah.
Now, this guy was a notorious drug kingpin in Queens, New York.
Right.
And what we're going to try to do is figure out kind of like the weird juxtaposition of this guy, right? He was super ruthless in his criminal enterprise, but then later expressed deep regret for his actions.
Right.
So we want to try to figure out how those two things can exist within the same person.
Yeah.
And we're going to be using primarily a Wikipedia article about Nichols.
Okay.
So let's just kind of jump right into it, right?
Yeah, let's do it. What's interesting to me is that he was actually born on Christmas Day, 1958. Huh. A day that we associate with hope and redemption.
Right.
But he becomes this figure associated with darkness and violence.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a almost like a contradiction.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and I think that really sets the stage for how complicated the story is going to be.
Yeah.
He was born in Bessemer, Alabama,
Okay.
but then eventually ends up in New York.
Okay.
And we can't talk about Fat Cat without talking about his nickname.
Right.
Fat Cat, it's not exactly subtle.
Yeah.
And it kind of speaks to his imposing just physical presence.
Yeah.
Like a thick neck, broad build.
Yeah.
Like the kind of guy who could just walk into a room and you're kind of like, whoa.
Yeah. Right. And that was so critical to his success in the drug trade.
Yeah.
You have to project power and an image of power,
Yes.
even in something like a nickname,
Yes.
to maintain control and instill fear.
Yes.
It's basically a way of saying, don't mess with me without having to say it.
Exactly. And, his criminal enterprise, I mean, it was massive.
Yeah.
During the peak of the crack epidemic in the 80s,
Right.
he led this huge drug trafficking organization in Jamaica, Queens.
Right.
I mean, think about it. He's got Howard Pappy Mason, his friend from prison.
Yep.
He's got Lucas Spoon Steven,
Okay.
his trusted confidant.
Right.
And then you've got Joseph Mike Bones Rogers.
Okay.
It's like, this isn't just some small-time, street corner hustle.
Right.
This is like an organized network pumping drugs into a community.
It's like a reminder that so often we focus on these individuals in these stories, but there's a whole network
Oh, yeah.
of individuals involved in perpetuating this cycle of harm.
Absolutely.
And that impact is felt throughout the community.
And get this, to really drive home like the audacity of this operation,
Okay.
he used a deli as his headquarters.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
So he inherits Big Mac's Deli
Okay.
from his father-in-law, right?
Okay.
And essentially turns it into
Oh, wow.
like the nerve center
Yeah.
for his drug empire.
That's crazy.
It's like he's got this entrepreneurial mind,
Right.
but it's so twisted.
Yeah. That's really striking. It highlights how he blended into, like seemingly legitimate businesses,
Right.
using that as a cover for his activities.
Yeah.
And this is something that organized crime figures do all the time.
Right.
It's blurring the lines between the underworld and the everyday world.
Right.
And it reminds us that these criminal enterprises are often hiding in plain sight.
Right in front of us.
Yeah.
It wasn't all just like business savvy, though.
Right.
This is where the story gets kind of dark.
Yeah.
So Nichols was linked to the murders of two people.
Right.
And, this is where we see like the real brutal reality of his world.
These weren't just, random acts of violence. These were calculated moves to eliminate threats
Yeah.
and maintain his grip on power.
Right.
One of the victims was actually a close childhood friend,
Wow.
someone he had known for years.
That's crazy.
The other victim was his former girlfriend, Myrtle Horsham.
Okay.
She was only 20 years old at the time,
Oh, wow.
and she was the mother of his son.
God, that's awful.
Yeah.
It's just chilling to think about that level of betrayal.
Yeah.
Especially with the childhood friend.
Right.
Like, to think that someone, capable of such loyalty could also order, such a cold-blooded act.
Right.
It's just so disturbing.
It is.
And the murder of Myrtle.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just heartbreaking.
It's hard to even fathom
Yeah.
the kind of mindset that could justify taking the life
Right.
of the mother of his own child.
It's unbelievable.
This is where you start to think about the psychology of a criminal mastermind like Nichols.
Right.
He claimed that Myrtle made him look bad by
Uh-huh.
spending his money on another man.
Yeah.
It gives us a glimpse into his worldview.
Yeah.
It was all about power and control
Mhm.
and a very twisted sense of respect.
Yeah.
He used violence as a tool,
Yeah.
a necessary evil to maintain his position
Well-
and his reputation.
Yeah, like an image thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, God. It's a level of ruthlessness that's just, hard to even grasp.
It's difficult.
And, the consequences of his actions were just absolutely devastating.
They were far-reaching.
Yeah, so after Myrtle's murder,
Okay.
his own mother, Louise Coleman, disowned him.
Wow.
It just, it speaks to the profound impact that his crimes had on the people closest to him.
Right.
Like just shattering these family bonds
Absolutely.
and leaving this trail of pain and suffering in his wake.
Yeah, the consequences weren't just confined to the victims themselves.
Wow.
Really fractured families.
Yeah.
Eroded trust within the community.
Right.
It's a reminder that the impact of crime goes so far beyond just the immediate victims.
Yeah,
It leaves these scars that can really take generations to heal.
absolutely. And eventually all of this caught up with him,
Right.
right? involvement in the murders.
Yeah.
This vast drug trafficking and racketeering operation,
Uh-huh.
it all led to his arrest, a
Oh,
conviction,
yeah.
and, he ends up pleading guilty to all the charges.
Wow.
And he was sentenced to 25 years to life for the murders,
Okay.
plus an additional 40 years for the other charges.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that that racketeering charge
Right.
meant that this wasn't just, a drug dealing operation.
Yeah.
It was a pattern of illegal activities.
Uh-huh.
Things like extortion, money laundering, and likely a lot more violence.
Right.
All designed to maintain and expand this enterprise.
Right. So this wasn't just some, drug dealer.
Right.
This was like a sophisticated,
It was an organization.
a criminal organization with Nichols right at the top,
Exactly.
calling all the shots.
Yeah.
So here he is, locked away,
Right.
facing, a lifetime behind bars.
Yeah.
Seemingly, paying for his crimes.
Right.
But then, years later, 2010,
Okay.
something unexpected happens.
What's that?
He writes a letter from prison,
Okay.
and it gets published
Wow.
in the New York Daily News.
This letter was really fascinating.
Yeah.
After years of silence, Nichols decides to speak out.
Right.
What he had to say was both surprising and complex.
Yeah.
He expresses remorse
Okay.
for his crimes.
Right.
He talked about having all this time
Yeah.
to ponder his misdeeds
Ugh.
and offered an apology to the
Oh.
victims and their families.
That raises a lot of questions.
It does.
I mean, here's this guy
yeah.
who, orchestrated this whole massive criminal enterprise,
Right.
ordered hits on people he knew,
Yeah.
caused so much pain and suffering.
Right.
And now he's saying he's sorry.
Right.
It's hard to,
Yeah.
to put those two things together.
It's hard to reconcile.
Yeah.
But it makes us think about the possibility of change,
Yeah.
even in someone who has committed such awful acts.
Right.
Can someone like Lorenzo Nichols genuinely feel remorse?
Yeah.
Is it even possible to find redemption after causing so much harm? These
Yeah.
are questions that have no easy answers.
No, they don't. It's a real dilemma.
It is.
On one hand,
Yeah.
you have the severity of the crimes, the evidence of his ruthlessness.
Right.
But on the other,
Yeah.
you have this expression of regret,
Right.
this attempt to atone for his past.
It's a real moral struggle.
Yeah, and it leads to this other thing that happened.
Okay.
So in April 2022,
Okay.
Nichols is granted parole from state prison.
Wow.
This decision was probably based on, a bunch of factors, good behavior while incarcerated,
Yeah.
his expressions of remorse.
Yeah.
But it's important to understand that being released from prison doesn't mean he was a free man.
Oh, right.
He was immediately transferred to federal custody
Okay.
to serve time for those federal convictions.
So even though he's out of state prison,
Right.
he's still got more time.
Oh, yeah. His legal issues weren't over.
Yeah, it shows how complex this system really is.
Yeah.
The interplay of state and federal laws,
Right.
the considerations for parole,
Yeah.
the consequences of past actions, all these factors
Yeah.
kind of come together in Nichols's case and create this very intricate legal situation.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So here we are, trying to figure out what to make of this guy.
It's a tough one.
It really is. I
And-
mean, on one hand, you have like this, just brutal drug kingpin
Right.
who like terrorized a community, took lives
Yeah.
without even thinking about it.
Right.
And then on the other hand, you've got this guy who's seemingly remorseful,
Right.
asking for forgiveness and a second chance.
It really makes you think about justice and rehabilitation
Yeah.
and about whether people can really change.
Yeah. Can someone truly change after doing these kinds of things?
Right.
And if they can, like, what does that even look like?
Exactly.
Does just saying sorry mean that you're rehabilitated?
Right.
I mean, these are tough questions.
Yeah, they are.
And I imagine our listeners are probably thinking about this too.
I would hope so.
It's easy to just say, like, once a criminal, always a criminal,
Yeah.
especially with someone like Nichols.
Right.
But then, what's the point of parole
Right. Exactly.
if we don't believe people can change?
Yeah.
It's like you have to confront your own beliefs about second chances.
It is.
Can we forgive someone like Lorenzo Nichols?
Right.
And if we can't, like, what does that say about us?
Yeah. What does that say about our compassion?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our belief in redemption.
Exactly.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
And I don't think there are any easy answers.
I agree.
But I think, maybe that's the point of doing a deep dive like this.
Yeah.
It's not always about, finding a neat and tidy conclusion.
Right.
It's more about exploring a complex story
Yeah.
and thinking about all the nuances.
Yeah. And it's important to remember the other factors that play into crime.
Oh, yeah. for sure.
We can't just blame individuals
Right.
without thinking about the social and economic conditions.
Right.
That can lead to crime,
Yeah.
poverty, lack of opportunity.
Oh,
Yeah, it's all connected.
it's a good reminder that these stories are never simple. Lorenzo Nichols is a pretty unique case,
He is.
but his story raises a lot of questions about, bigger issues.
Yeah,
Poverty, opportunity, the fact that crime is kind of a cycle,
it is.
and it definitely leaves us with more questions than answers,
That's true.
which honestly is sometimes like the best outcome of one of these deep dives.
It is. It makes you think.
It really does. So as you continue to think about Lorenzo Nichols and everything we've talked about, I think it's important to ask ourselves, can true redemption happen without restorative justice? And what is our responsibility as individuals and as a society to really address what causes crime and create a path for people to rehabilitate themselves? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life of Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols. It's been quite a journey. All right, so you're ready for a deep dive.
Yeah, let's do it.
Today, we're going to be looking into one of the most fascinating figures in American crime history, Maba Barker. Now, you've probably seen her portrayed as this ruthless criminal mastermind, especially in movies and TV.
Yeah.
But was she really the brains behind the notorious Barker Karpus gang?
It's a classic case, I think, of perception versus reality. Her image has been so heavily influenced over the years by the media and even by law enforcement agencies like the FBI. They had their own reasons for portraying her a certain way.
Of course, it was going to boost their own image, right?
Exactly.
Well, to try to get at the bottom of all this, we're using excerpts from her Wikipedia article, accessed just this month, as our main source.
Remember, this is just one starting point. Wikipedia itself is a collection of information.
Right.
It can be a valuable resource, but it's crucial to always dig deeper, consider multiple perspectives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's kick things off by talking about Ma Barker's early life. She was born in Arizona. Donnie Clark grew up in Ash Grove, Missouri.
Okay.
So a pretty small town, kind of a normal rural vibe.
Yeah.
Married George Barker.
Okay.
And together they had 4 sons, Herman, Lloyd, Arthur, who they nicknamed Doc, and Fred. Not exactly the makings of a crime family at first glance, right, Day?
It's interesting because despite this seemingly ordinary beginning, the FBI later tried to paint a picture of the family as being neglectful and uneducated, almost like to fit their narrative of her as a criminal mastermind.
Oh, I see, like building this backstory that justifies her later actions.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of later actions, the Barker boys started getting into trouble with the law pretty early on.
Yeah.
Herman, the oldest, was arrested for highway robbery in 1910. And from there, it seems like their crimes just escalated.
The turning point seems to have been their involvement with the Central Park Gang in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Ooh.
They went from pretty petty offenses to serious crimes, robbery, even murder.
Wow.
And this really solidified their reputation as a dangerous gang.
So during all this, as they're making this name for themselves in the criminal underworld,
Yeah.
their father, George Barker, kind of disappears from the picture. Now, the FBI later implied that Ma Barker had a loose moral life, and that was the reason he left, really trying to, further tarnish her reputation.
Trying to paint her in a negative light.
Yeah. However, a family friend offers a totally different account, claiming that George and Ma were constantly arguing over the boys' criminal activities. And that's what drove them apart.
It's important to note here, there's absolutely no evidence to support the FBI's claims about Ma Barker's supposed infidelity.
Right.
This really makes you question their motives, right? Whether they were intentionally trying to discredit her.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It definitely raises some red flags. So now let's fast forward a bit to 1931.
Okay.
Fred, the youngest Barker son, is released from prison. And he teams up with another ex-con, Alvin Karpus.
Okay.
They form the Barker Karpus gang. And guess who joins them on this little road trip?
Who?
Ma Barker, along with her partner at the time, Arthur Dunlop.
Wow.
Not exactly your average family vacation.
This is where things get really complicated.
Right.
They were constantly on the move, living under all these aliases, making it really difficult to pinpoint Ma's exact involvement.
Yeah.
There's even a wanted poster from that time offering a reward for her capture.
Really?
Listing her as an accomplice.
Wanted poster. Okay, so things are getting pretty serious.
Yeah, I mean, this poster gives us a glimpse into how law enforcement was already building this case against her,
Wow.
even if her specific actions remained unclear.
Okay, so their journey eventually leads them to St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, St. Paul at the time was known for its pretty corrupt law enforcement.
Right.
And get this, they end up operating under the protection of the police chief himself, Thomas Big Tom Brown.
Talk about having friends in high places.
It sounds like they basically had a free pass to just commit crimes.
In a way, they did. This corruption within the police force really provided a shield for them, allowing them to plan and execute crimes with a sense of security. It raises questions, too, about how much Ma Barker even knew about all these arrangements and the extent to which she may have benefited from them.
That's a really good point. It
Yeah.
kind of reframes our whole understanding of how they were able to operate.
Yeah.
And it was in St. Paul that the Barker Karpus gang pulled off their most notorious crimes, kidnapping wealthy individuals for ransom.
Yeah.
But while all this is happening, Ma Barker's partner, Arthur Dunlop, he mysteriously vanishes. Some accounts suggest that he was killed by the gang for talking too much.
It's one of the most intriguing mysteries, I think, surrounding this whole period.
Yeah.
We know that Alvin Karpus, Fred's partner, later described Dunlop as a pain in the ass
Okay.
who couldn't hold his liquor, suggesting he was a liability to the gang. But whether Ma Barker played a role in his disappearance or even knew about it remains a subject of pure speculation.
So the gang, now minus Dunlop, decides to relocate to Wisconsin.
Okay.
But here's a twist. They seemingly keep Ma Barker at arm's length from their operations.
Really?
They're laundering all this ransom money, living this high life.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like she wasn't directly involved. Why would they distance themselves from her like that?
There's a couple ways we could interpret this.
Right.
It's possible they were trying to protect her, maybe from incriminating knowledge, shielding her from some of the more dangerous aspects of their activities.
Interesting.
Or maybe they just no longer saw her as a vital part of the operation. Maybe they even viewed her as more of a burden than an active participant.
So more of a mother figure than a true partner in their crimes.
It's certainly possible. And it really challenges that common perception of her, as the mastermind calling the shots. It suggests within the gang dynamic, she might have occupied a totally different role.
So we're starting to see cracks in this whole image of her as a ruthless criminal mastermind.
Right.
But things are about to get even more intense. The FBI eventually catches up with the gang down in Florida, leading to the infamous Ocklawaha shootout in 1935.
This event became a pivotal moment in her story, really solidifying her place in American crime lore.
Right.
It's a scene that's been replayed so many times in movies, TV shows, often with her depicted as this gun-toting mama leading the charge.
Yeah.
But the reality, as is so often the case, is much more nuanced, much more shrouded in controversy.
All right. Well, you've definitely piqued my interest.
Yeah.
What exactly went down at the Ocklawaha shootout? And how does it challenge this image that we have of her? We'll unpack all of that right after this. So we left off with the Barker Karpus gang holed up in this lakeside house in Florida.
Right.
The FBI tracked them down, and things are about to get, well, pretty explosive. Can you tell us about what exactly happened at the Ocklawaha shootout itself?
Well, it's important to remember that the FBI had been building this case against them for years.
Yeah.
They saw them as public enemy number one.
Right.
And J. Edgar Hoover, the head honcho at the FBI, he was determined to take them down, especially after these high-profile kidnappings, like the one with William Hamm, the wealthy brewer.
Oh, right.
So the stakes were incredibly high for both sides.
For sure.
So the FBI, they had surrounded the house, and on the morning of January 16th, 1935,
Okay.
they demanded that the occupants surrender.
Makes sense.
But Fred and Ma Barker, they decided to fight back instead.
Oh, wow.
And this resulted in a 4-hour gun battle that ultimately ended with both of their deaths.
4 hours. That's a long time to be exchanging gunfire. And were there any witnesses to all this?
Yeah, believe it or not, some witnesses claimed that locals actually gathered nearby
Really?
to watch the whole thing unfold.
Oh, my God.
Some even said people were having picnics during the shootout.
Picnics during a shootout. That's insane. Sounds like a scene from like an old Western movie.
I know, it's crazy. And this is where it gets tricky, trying to separate the fact from fiction.
Yeah.
Because the FBI, they painted this picture of Ma Barker as this gun-wielding outlaw firing a Tommy gun from the window.
Yeah.
They even released a photo of her dead body with the weapon nearby.
Oh, wow.
which became this iconic image, you know?
Oh, yeah, I've definitely seen that.
But some accounts challenge this whole version of events.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, there were conflicting reports about whether she actually fired any shots during the shootout.
Huh.
Some witnesses claimed they never even saw her with a gun, while others said, maybe she fired a few shots, but only in self-defense.
Oh.
And then there's the question of whether that famous photo of her with the Tommy gun was staged by the FBI.
Oh, wow, to kind of further their narrative.
Exactly.
So it sounds like there's a lot of uncertainty about what actually happened inside that house.
There is.
And that uncertainty just adds to the whole mystique surrounding her.
Right. Did she go down guns blazing? Or was she more of a bystander? We may never know for sure.
So in the aftermath of the shootout, J. Edgar Hoover, always one for public relations.
Oh, yeah.
He seizes the opportunity to portray Mab Barker as this ruthless criminal mastermind,
Of course.
even calling her the most vicious, dangerous, and resourceful criminal brain of the decade.
It's a perfect example of how the FBI, under Hoover, used the media to really shape public perception.
Right.
It played right into the existing fears about gangsters at the time and really helped elevate the FBI's role as these protectors of society.
So portraying her as this mastermind really benefited them.
Exactly. It helped bolster their reputation and also helped justify their tactics.
That's interesting. But if we take a closer look at this whole narrative, it starts to unravel, right? What evidence is there that contradicts this image of her as the brains of the whole operation?
Well, we have accounts from members of the Barker-Karpus gang themselves who paint a very different picture of her.
Really?
Yeah, like Alvin Karpus, Fred's partner, and arguably the true leader of the gang.
Okay.
He described Ma as more of an old-fashioned homebody.
Oh, wow.
Even called her superstitious, gullible, generally law-abiding.
Wow. Hardly the mastermind Hoover made her out to be.
Right. So if Karpus was the real leader, what role did Ma Barker actually play? Was she just a harmless old lady along for the ride?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big difference between those two things.
Yeah, well, not exactly. There's no doubt she was aware of her son's criminal activities. She provided them with alibis, helped them launder money, even rented hideouts. In fact, there are accounts of her even driving the getaway car after a robbery.
Oh, wow. So she was more involved than just, baking cookies for the gang.
Right, exactly. But it doesn't necessarily mean she was the one calling all the shots. Yeah.
It seems like her role was more, supportive than strategic. I kind of think of her as a combination of a den mother and a resourceful accomplice.
Okay.
Always willing to lend a hand, but not necessarily the one planning the heists.
All right. Yeah.
There are even stories about her being sent to the movies.
Oh, really?
While the gang was out committing crimes, almost as if they were trying to keep her in the dark.
Wow.
About the details.
It makes you wonder how much she really knew about their criminal enterprise.
It does, and it's a reminder that even within a family, there can be these layers of secrecy and wholly different perceptions of reality.
Okay, so we've explored her early life, her son's descent into crime, and these conflicting accounts of her role within the gang.
Yeah.
But there's one more crucial element to this whole story that we need to address, and that's police corruption.
Oh.
Remember that connection to Big Tom Brown?
Yeah.
The corrupt police chief in St. Paul?
But how does that factor into all of this?
Well, the fact that they were able to thrive in St. Paul under his protection really challenges the idea that she was the mastermind behind their success. It suggests their success had more to do with a system that was rigged in their favor than any strategic brilliance on her part.
So rather than focusing on, taking down this corrupt system, it was easier for the FBI to just focus on her as the face of the gang's evil.
It's definitely a possibility worth considering. By highlighting her role as this supposed mastermind, they could deflect attention from that uncomfortable truth about police corruption.
For sure.
It made for a more compelling story. The FBI is the heroes taking down this dangerous matriarch who controlled this ruthless gang.
It's crazy how this one case just opens up so many questions about how history is written and who benefits from certain narratives.
It does, and it reminds us to always think critically about the information we're presented with, especially when it comes from sources with a vested interest in shaping public perception.
Okay, so if we try to piece together everything we've learned today, what conclusions can we draw about Ma Barker? Was she a ruthless criminal mastermind or a misunderstood mother caught in the crossfire of her son's choices?
I think based on the evidence we've examined, she was more of a complex and
Yeah.
tragic figure than a true criminal mastermind.
Okay.
I mean, she was deeply devoted to her sons, even as they spiraled into a life of crime.
Yeah.
She provided them with support, assistance,
Right.
but there's just no concrete evidence to suggest she was the strategic mind behind their operations.
So maybe her image as this mastermind was more of a media fabrication.
Right, than a reflection of reality.
Yeah.
It seems to be the most likely scenario.
Right.
The FBI, under Hoover, they had a strong motivation to portray her as this dangerous figure.
Of course.
It fit their narrative, it bolstered their reputation, and perhaps it even helped them cover up these uncomfortable truths about corruption within their own ranks.
It's a powerful reminder of how easy it is to create and perpetuate a myth, especially when it serves a particular agenda.
It is, and it really highlights the importance of digging deeper,
Yeah,
questioning assumptions,
absolutely.
and seeking out diverse perspectives when we try to understand historical events.
So Mo Barker's story, it's less about a criminal mastermind and more about a mother's unwavering loyalty, the complexities of family dynamics, and the manipulation of narratives for political gain.
Well said.
And while we may never fully unravel all the mysteries surrounding her life, it's clear that her legacy continues to fascinate
Yeah,
and challenge us,
it does.
reminding us that history is rarely black and white.
Very true.
It's a tapestry woven from multiple threads, and it's up to us to examine those threads carefully
Absolutely.
to understand the full picture.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you to ponder all the many layers of Mo Barker's story.
Until next time, keep diving deep, keep questioning, and keep searching for the truth behind the headlines.
All right, so get ready, guys. Today we're really diving deep into a mystery that's both, I don't know about you, but I find it both fascinating and kind of heartbreaking. It's the life and death of Mac Dre.
Yeah.
And he wasn't just some Bay Area rapper. He was, I mean, a true force in the music world. But his story? Man, it's a wild ride. Talent, ambition, life on the streets, the whole music industry thing, and then this shadow of this unsolved murder.
Yeah, and what makes this deep dive so interesting is we're not just talking like headlines and news clips here, right?
Yeah.
We've got these firsthand accounts, rumors from the streets, even like glimpses into actual FBI files. It's definitely a tangled web.
Oh, yeah.
But I think if we're careful, if we untangle each thread, maybe, just maybe, we can get a little closer to the truth of what really went down.
All right, so let's start with Mac Dre himself. Born Andre Hicks, he wasn't some overnight success story.
Yo.
He came straight out of Oakland and his talent. Man, undeniable, even as a young artist.
Oh, absolutely.
But his path to success, let's just say it wasn't exactly a straight shot to the top.
No, not at all. His journey was definitely marked by these run-ins with the law.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy how early on these tensions started. I mean, you've got that whole story about his song Police. He wasn't just like complained about the cops in general. He called out specific officers,
Yeah.
like by name,
Wait, he actually named names in the song? Come on, that's ballsy.
right? Ballsy or, I don't know, maybe a little reckless, depending on how you see it. But it wasn't just some publicity stunt, Police. It wasn't just controversial. It was like this real conflict that was brewing between Mac Dre, whose art, his music was really reflecting life on the streets. And then you have this system that seemed to be criminalizing those very realities. And this whole clash, this tension, it became a recurring theme in his life.
And that brings us to 1992. I mean, that's a pivotal year in his story. It really casts a shadow over everything, even leading up to the mystery of his death.
Exactly, 92. That's when Mac Dre, along with J. Diggs and Kilo Kurt, they were arrested in Fresno. Conspiracy to commit burglary, they said. Now, the FBI, they built this case saying they were planning this big bank heist. But Mac Dre, he always said he was innocent. Throughout the whole thing, he never backed down from that.
5 years, though. 5 years in prison for something he insisted he didn't do. I mean, even back then, that seems incredibly harsh. Was there more to it? Is that what people were saying?
That's the question, right?
Yeah.
That's what's been haunting this case for decades. Some people, they believe the FBI targeted Mac Dre because of his music. Especially after Police, it was the peak of the so-called war on drugs. And, back then, gangster rap, it was seen as a threat by a lot of people. Law enforcement, they were cracking down. Whether they were right to target him for his music or if those charges were legit, that's the debate. And it's a debate that's still going on today.
And then you got this whole other layer, this whole informant angle, a name that comes up again and again, Corey Dunn. But here's the thing, he turns up dead, riddled with bullets. After that whole Fresno incident,
And that's what really gets people talking, you know.
Yeah.
This chilling detail, it just throws gasoline on an already out-of-control fire. People start to wonder, was there something darker going on here? This wasn't just a burglary anymore, was it?
Okay, so we've got Mac Dre doing time for something he swore he didn't do. You've got rumors of the FBI having it out for him and a dead informant. I mean, how do you even come back from all that? You know, it really speaks to his strength, you know, his resilience. To come back from all that, Mac Dre, he gets out of prison in '96.
Yeah.
More determined than ever. This guy, he wanted to make his mark on music.
Absolutely.
And he did. He really did.
He didn't just bounce back, he like exploded. He starts Fizz Entertainment, his own label.
Wow.
And his music, man, it was everywhere, even like Hawaii.
Right.
This wasn't just some local thing anymore. This was national.
Yeah. But this new world, right? All the success, the fame, it couldn't have been easy, especially with his past. I mean, that always follows you.
It does. It does. Mac Dre, he was walking this tightrope, trying to balance this music career with where he came from.
Right.
The streets, they were always there.
Yeah.
And the pressure was on. It was intense.
And that leads us to Kansas City, 2004. There's this planned concert, this promoter, and it feels like things are about to go very wrong.
It does.
Who is this promoter, by the way?
Damian Whitmill.
Damian Whitmill. What's his story?
So Whitmill, he says he booked Mac Dre, right? And some other Bay Area artists. Yuck Meth, PSD, FA Driva, Halloween Weekend, series of shows. Seemed like a good deal, at least on paper.
Yeah, but we wouldn't be talking about it if it was that simple.
You got that right.
So what happened?
Well, according to Whitmill, Mac Dre was being difficult. Like, showing up late, messing things up.
Really?
He even claims that at one show, Mac Dre's people, they rushed the stage. Security had to get involved. Shut the whole thing down.
Okay, hold on. So we've already got different stories here. This is what you were talking about before, right?
Uh-huh.
This whole tangled web.
Yeah, this is where it gets messy.
So what are other people saying? People who were there.
Well, Jay Diggs, he was close to Mac Dre.
Mm-hmm.
He says, yeah, there was some problems. But he blames the promoter. Said Whitmill wasn't handling things professionally. In fact, Yuckmouth, he actually left after the first show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he got out of there. Wanted nothing to do with it.
So you're telling me Mac Dre, he's basically stuck in Kansas City?
Pretty much.
And things are getting worse. You'd think he would have just left, cut his losses.
You'd think, right. But he didn't. For whatever reason, he stayed. Maybe he thought he could fix things, get paid what he was owed. Who knows?
Yeah.
But that decision, staying, it cost him his life.
Because now we're talking about the early hours of November 1st, 2004.
Mm-hmm.
The music literally dies. Mac Dre leaves the club, white van.
Right.
What happened?
This is the part that's really scary, you know, the violence. That's the thing about this life sometimes. It's always there.
Yeah.
So 2, 3 in the morning, van's going down Highway 71. Suddenly this dark sedan pulls up next to him, and they just open fire.
Open fire,
That's
like
right.
a drive-by.
More like an execution.
Wow.
They found like 30 shell casings,
Yeah.
at least 2 different guns.
Oh, my God.
It was brutal. And they were after Mac Dre. They went right for him. This was personal.
It was a hit.
It was.
So who did it? Was it just this concert gone wrong or something else, something bigger?
So many theories.
Yeah.
But one thing's for sure, Mac Dre's death. It wasn't just the music world that felt it. It was this whole community. They saw him as a symbol of hope, beating the odds. His music, it still means something.
Of course.
But what happened that night, that's still a mystery. And it's one we're trying to solve, piece by piece.
So Mac Dre's murder, I mean, it wasn't just the sadness,
Right.
right? People were shocked
Yeah.
and angry, and that led to a lot of rumors.
Yeah.
One name kept coming up, Fat Tone, rapper from Kansas City.
Right.
What's the connection there?
Well, the word on the street was that he and Mac Dre, they had some kind of beef.
Beef, like what, over music, territory.
Could be. Some people even said there was this diss track. Fat Tone bragging about killing Mac Dre.
Whoa, hold on. Did anyone ever actually hear this diss track? It seems like that would have been huge.
That's the thing. Lots of talk.
Mm.
But no one's ever produced the track.
Yeah.
It's like this weird hip-hop ghost story. Everyone's heard of it, but no one's actually heard it.
Wild. And what about Fat Tone? What did he say about all this?
He denied it, said he had nothing to do with Mac Dre's death.
But then here's the thing. Less than a year later, Fat Tone gets murdered too. It's like life imitating art, you know, except this is real life, real death.
It's crazy, right? And it gets even more complicated.
Yeah.
2 guys, Andre Dow, they called him Mac Minister, and this other guy, Jason Mathis, they were convicted for killing Fat Tone. But hold on, gets better. One of the witnesses against Dow, they recanted, said they lied.
Seriously, after the trial, that changes everything. What would make someone do that? So was Fat Tone killed in revenge for MacDre? Or was it something else entirely?
It's impossible to say for sure. Just more questions, you know.
And then, just when you think this case can't get any weirder, JT the Bigga Figga, he drops this bomb, says that Jay Diggs and Kilo Kurt, MacDre's own friends, they were behind it, said they wanted control of his label.
It's important to remember, though, Diggs has always denied that very strongly. There's never been any proof, no charges or anything.
So where does that leave us? I mean, we've been through it all. Rumors, different sides of the story, talk of conspiracies. Do we have any answers about who killed MacDre?
Officially, no. It's still unsolved, as far as the police are concerned anyway. It's sad, you know. His music meant so much to people. But what really happened that night, we may never know.
So what's the takeaway here? We've uncovered a lot. Different versions of what happened, unanswered questions. Maybe the truth is out there somewhere. Or maybe we have to accept that we'll never really know. But at least we're keeping his story alive. It's got to count for something, right?
It does, and maybe that's the thing about MacDre. Even without all the answers, his story, it makes you think about music, about life and death, and the search for truth even when it's hard.
MacDre's music, it's still out there, his legacy secure. But the mystery, that's still with us. It reminds you that some stories just don't have easy endings. So what do you think happened? Maybe we'll never know for sure. But the journey, that's what matters. Keep asking questions, keep searching for the truth, and keep the music playing. Until next time.